The story begins in the 60s with a young woman named Iris and her boyfriend, Paul. He decides to surprise her and manages to get tickets for the grand opening of the Skyview, a fancy restaurant at the top of a tower. Iris loves the surprise, but her joy turns into fear because of the tower's terrifying height. Seeing the crowded elevator, she says she doesn't mind waiting for the next one, but the elevator operator assures her there is space, and the couple ends up getting in. To make matters worse, the door gets stuck and has to be forced shut. The panoramic view from the elevator only emphasizes the terrible distance to the ground, and the operator mentions that the amazing tower was completed 5 months ahead of schedule. The transparent floor makes Iris dizzy, but it has the opposite effect on a boy who decides to tap dance inside. Paul doesn't notice her terror, and his problems only begin at the top because the receptionist bars the couple's entry. He explains that he spoke to a certain man named Jake, but that employee has just been fired. Iris doesn't mind losing the dinner and does everything to cheer Paul up until they get close to the windows. Suddenly feeling nauseous, she asks to go to the restroom. As she crosses the dance floor, a champagne cork hits the chandelier, causing one of the pendants to detach, cracking the glass floor. Unaware of all this, Iris quickens her pace, trying to control her nausea. The band takes a break, and the singer, Chantel, comes to talk to the girl upon noticing the situation. That nausea isn't just vertigo. In fact, Iris is pregnant. She hasn't told Paul yet, but Chantel says that if he loves her, everything will be fine. We see that she herself has a small child backstage, waiting for the show to end. After this, Paul and Iris go to the terrace, where he proposes to her, and she seizes the moment to reveal her secret. He is overjoyed to learn about the baby, much to Iris's enormous relief, and she accepts the proposal. At the same time, the same boy from the elevator throws a coin into the air, and it ends up entering the ventilation duct, getting stuck in a fan. Iris and Paul descend to dance, unaware that the floor is already all cracked, just as the music becomes more upbeat. The coin dislodges from the fan and is ejected with such force that it pierces a pipe, causing a gas leak. As the dancers stomp on the cracked glass and the gas begins to spread through the building, some of the support beams also start to give way under the weight of the party. Suddenly, the floor actually breaks, and dozens of people plunge to their deaths, knocking down one of the beams in the fall. Below, the staff is startled by the rain of bodies and run to avoid being hit. Iris was not on the glass and manages to save herself, but Paul is left hanging and can't hold on for long. The remaining guests go into a panic, and a woman bumps into the chef who is flambeing a dish, igniting his clothing. She runs through the hall screaming, unaware that she is carrying the flames into the gas-filled area. The explosion engulfs the top of the tower, and the coin lands on the chandelier. Part of the staircase collapses, and so many people rush to the elevator that it also plunges down. Iris realizes that things are rolling toward one corner and heads in the opposite direction just as the structure gives way, causing several people to slip and smash into the windows. It is then that the coin falls onto a piano that was already on the brink, and it also slips, shattering the windows and crashing down on the boy, the only one who managed to descend the stairs. Half of the party hall falls, and now only Iris remains, along with the singer's son. She runs to save him as the rest of the hall begins to collapse, and they both hang by the engagement ring, but not for long. When Iris dives headfirst onto a sharp point, the young Stephanie Reyes wakes up today, startled by the nightmare. This has been happening frequently, and knowing that her grandmother's name was Iris, she decides to investigate the past before her roommate kicks her out. Stephanie's father is named Marty, and he is happy to see her, but he doesn't seem very willing to talk about Iris, his mother-in-law. He says he threw away Darlene's things as soon as she left. Stephanie has a brother named Charlie, who is leaving to visit their cousins. Seeing this as an opportunity to interrogate the family, Stephanie offers Charlie a ride. On the way, she tells him about the nightmares and reminds him that their father shouldn't know anything about it. Her cousins are Eric, Bobby, and Julia. Nobody seems too interested in the surprise visit, and Stephanie realizes how distant she has become from everyone. But she refocuses on the mission and goes to talk with her uncles, Howard and Brenda. Howard is Iris's son, and also doesn't like to talk about her. But Stephanie notices the tension between the two when she mentions dreaming about the Skyview. Howard says his mother is a very disturbed person, and since becoming a widow, she has made his and his sister Darlene's lives hellish. Iris was so obsessed with the risk of accidents that she wouldn't let them leave their room. Things got so bad that she ended up losing custody of her children, but continued haunting them with letters and ominous warnings. Stephanie asks to see these letters, and Howard refuses to help her, cutting off the subject entirely. Brenda is the only one who feels pity for Stephanie and ends up giving her a tip on where she might find clues. Searching the indicated drawer, she finds a box and nearly faints upon seeing a photo of Iris with Paul at the entrance of the Skyview, as the image appears to have been taken from her nightmare. The letters from her grandmother are also in the box, and Stephanie decides to go to the address on the envelopes. The trip is long, and the destination is practically a fortress, where she has to plead through the intercom for her grandmother to let her in, and only after emptying her pockets. Stefani leaves everything in the appropriate compartment and crosses the yard filled with protections and traps. The inside of the house is almost completely dark, and her grandmother behaves very strangely, as if she is in a constant state of alert. Despite this, she agrees to receive her and asks how her daughter Darlene is doing. Stephanie shares that her mother left when she was 10, and they have never seen each other since. Changing the subject, she talks about the nightmare, and Iris explains that it is not just a dream, but rather the premonition she herself had. It is then that we see what really happened at the Skyview's opening almost 50 years ago. Iris has the vision during the proposal and manages to take the coin from the boy before he throws it. Descending to the hall, she goes on stage and begins to speak into the microphone, telling everyone to get off the floor before the ground breaks. The guards try to remove her, but the guests notice that the glass is indeed cracking, and with that, Iris saves hundreds of lives. Back in the present, Iris says that the Skyview was closed and never reopened. However, Death got upset about the change of plans and returned to claim almost everyone who should have died that day, including Paul. That is why Iris lives this way, always anticipating Death's next move. Even so, now the game is over, as she was diagnosed with cancer 2 months ago. Stephanie says the nightmare began around that time too. Iris cannot explain the coincidence and only says that the most important thing is to pay attention when the universe sends you signals. She shows Stephanie a book she compiled with her research and says that her granddaughter needs to live there, as Death will now come to take the entire family. Stephanie feels torn between the relief of talking to someone who believes her and the horror of ending up like her grandmother. Regretting coming, she says she needs to go back to college and rushes to leave that place. Implying that her granddaughter should heed her warnings, Iris crosses the front door for the first time in 20 years and hands her the book. She then asks Stephanie to step back and observe what happens when someone marked lets their guard down. At that moment, the weather vane falls from the roof and bursts a fire extinguisher, propelled like a spear and piercing Iris's head. Stephanie is horrified by the scene and apologizes to Uncle Howard when she encounters him at the funeral. At her funeral, Darlene's arrival at her trailer causes a general commotion. Howard and Marty seem eager to catch up, while Charlie and Stephanie herself don't hide their resentment over being abandoned. However, Charlie accuses her of being equally distant, and she replies that at least she isn't crazy. Avoiding meeting her mother, Stephanie stays at her father's house while the family barbecues. Darlene arrives and makes a blunder as her cookies contain peanuts and she forgot that Bobby is allergic. Dozens of small details that would have driven Iris mad go unnoticed by the gathered family. Howard raises a toast to life, remembering how much joy his mother lost in isolation. Meanwhile, Stephanie opens the book she inherited from her and shivers upon seeing the coin glued to the first page. Fear begins to dominate her as she explores the notes and reads about the bizarre deaths of almost all the survivors of the Skyview. Howard tries to get his sister to reconnect with the family, but she says the children are better off without her. Stefani decides to go. There too, and calls her brother several times, but he is bouncing around with cousins, unaware of the rake underneath the trampoline. On the way to her uncle's house, Stefani begins to pick up the universe's hints just like her grandmother did, understanding signs that no one else would see. When the young people call Howard to play too, Darlene screams upon seeing the rake and rushes to remove it before her brother gets hurt. However, death will not be dodged so easily. Soon, Brenda knocks over a bottle that hits a button, causing a long coiled hose to fill. As it fills, it begins to push the tools hanging along with the rake. Stefani arrives just as Bobby snaps the elastic and screams. With the scare, Julia knocks over pieces of a game, placing a shard of glass right in Howard's path. He steps on the shard and cuts his foot, losing his balance and falling backward. The rake turns over at the same time and activates the lawnmower, which advances over his face. The horrific accident clears Stefani's doubts, and she begins to study the book diligently. She discovers that all the deaths occurred in the same order as Iris's premonition, and calls the family together to explain her findings. The original survivors were so numerous that death took this long to settle the score with each one. Now the next phase has begun, where death comes to collect the descendants. This means only Marty and Brenda are safe, as all the others wouldn't have even been born if the Skyview tragedy had occurred as it should have. According to the records, the order is by age and aims to eliminate each child's lineage one by one. Howard's death confirms this theory, and in this case, the next on the list is Eric. As expected, most of the relatives find this talk in very poor taste, and Brenda regrets having helped her niece find Iris. Charlie and Bobby are the only ones to show any fear of the dark prophecy, but the others just tell Stephanie to shut up, and Darlene warns that this kind of obsession is what ruined her life. From there, Eric goes straight to work, and his boss tells him to close the studio after the last client. Ignoring his cousin's frantic messages, he cleans the equipment with flammable liquid and then tattoos the word "Dad" on his arm. Then a decoration slips from the shelf and starts a chain reaction that ends with a jar of the liquid falling. When Eric goes to see what happened, one of the fan's chains comes loose and ends up snagging him by his piercing. To make matters worse, the fan doesn't stop, wrapping the chain and pulling Eric up by his nose. In a desperate race to rise quickly, he knocks over the lamp into the puddle and causes an explosion. In the morning, Stephanie and Charlie panic upon hearing the news of the fire, but soon discover that Eric escaped almost unscathed, only with a heart-shaped burn from falling on a mold. Nonetheless, Stephanie insists on her paranoia and follows her cousin down the street, noticing all the potential hazards, like a group of boys playing ball. When a garbage truck arrives, Stephanie tells Eric to stay away, and he does the opposite just to be stubborn. While the two fight, Julia starts her morning run when a ball knocks her into the garbage truck the vehicle is picking up. Eric, Stephanie, and Charlie run screaming to alert the driver, who is wearing headphones. Stephanie manages to climb onto the truck and tells Julia there's no danger, as she isn't next. Then Eric finally manages to stop the driver, but not in time to avoid disaster, and Julia is crushed by the compactor. Now that the relatives are starting to believe in Stefani's theories, she is confused and blames herself for getting the order wrong. It is then that Brenda reveals that Howard was not Eric's biological father. Stefani had been right all along, and even predicted everything that was about to attack Julia, and only got the victim wrong because she didn't know about her aunt's infidelity. Being next, Bobby asks for her help to survive, and now even Darlene trusts her daughter, but Marty still thinks it's all absurd. Stephanie shows the others a note from Iris about someone named JB, and Darlene remembers that this friend of Iris's worked at a hospital called Hope. They decide to go there in Darlene's trailer, and Eric remembers to throw away the peanut butter, as now every little precaution is crucial for Bobby. Stephanie is surprised to see pictures of herself around the trailer, and Darlene explains that she only left because she started to become like Iris, always afraid of losing her children in some accident. At the hospital, the mysterious JB greets everyone by name and already knows even the order in which they will die. He is Chantel's son, who should have died along with Iris and has been dodging fate ever. He explains that there are only two ways to get rid of the curse: survive a near-death experience, which is always very risky, or take someone's life. In this last case, the killer acquires the remaining time that their victim had. JB says he is very ill and is tired of dealing with the damned affected by the phenomenon. They are all going to die anyway, and then it will be his turn to face the scythe. Stephanie cannot accept this and tries to find some other solution, unsuccessfully. Eric trusts JB because of his wise demeanor and decides to kill Bobby with peanuts, planning to resurrect him afterward. He is so focused on the plan that he forgets all the other precautions and nearly crushes his brother under the candy machine while trying to get a stuck treat. Then he tells Bobby to wait in a room and slams the door, accidentally turning on the MRI machine. When the other three notice Eric and Bobby's absence, They imagine that the two are trying to provoke the near-death experience and start looking for them in the hospital. Eric returns with a wheelchair, ready to push his brother to the ER as soon as he starts to die. Nothing happens at first, and they begin to think that the allergy has been cured, but moments later, he starts choking, and Eric asks for patience, as he cannot help him before the time is right. He only realizes the machine's activity when Darlene calls, and his cell phone flies away, attracted by the magnetic force. Next, his piercings are yanked out ruthlessly, and the wheelchair crushes him against the machine, bending his body in half. The power continues to rise and reaches such an uncontrolled level that it even sucks the metals from the hallway. Bobby sees his antihistamine in Eric's hand and struggles to drag himself toward it, but he manages to apply it and halts the allergic reaction. When a nurse finally comes to check that room, a spring from the snack machine comes loose and gets sucked up by the magnet, piercing Bobby's forehead on the way. With that, Howard's lineage is wiped out, and the next in line is Darlene, Stephanie, and Charlie in that order. Knowing this, Darlene decides to isolate herself in Iris's fortress to stay alive and keep her children safe. When the three embrace, the coin slips out of the book and rolls down the street without Stephanie noticing. Darlene allows the two to accompany her to the hideout, as Stephanie is more experienced with the signs that may arise along the way. Right at the first intersection, Darlene almost collides the trailer with a truck and decides to pass the wheel to her daughter. After they leave, an old lady picks up the coin from the ground and keeps it in her purse. Only when the family arrives at their destination do they realize how difficult it is to get in, and Stephanie begins to have a bad feeling about the spotlights. Anxious to get her mother inside the house, she reverses and steps on the gas, crashing through the gate. With the jolt, an object falls from the upper compartment and hits her seatbelt buckle. One of the spotlights begins to spark and ignites the leaves accumulated in the gutter. Darlene tries to help her daughter free herself, but Stephanie says it's safer for everyone if she goes in quickly. However, once again her premonitions become reality, and the sparks from one of the lights cause a massive explosion, destroying the entire house and flipping the trailer, which ends up partially in the water. Stephanie is now submerged and unable to escape, while her brother is trapped under the debris. He panics upon seeing his mother fall, but it is she who comes to help him free himself, and then tells him to go save his sister. It is then that the light pole collapses, splitting Darlene in half in the fall. This makes Stephanie's situation even more critical, as now it is truly her turn. Charlie climbs onto the overturned trailer and jumps inside. Stephanie has stopped struggling when he manages to cut the seatbelt, but comes back to her senses moments later, thanks to chest compressions. The siblings weep for their mother's loss as they breathe a sigh of relief, since Stephanie's resurrection means the end of the curse. Weeks later, the day of Charlie's high school graduation arrives, and his date is a girl named Jenny. While Stephanie accompanies him to her house, that old lady who picked up the coin is at a lemonade stand nearby. It is precisely the cursed coin that falls from her purse and rolls all the way to the train tracks, where it ends up jamming the mechanism of the tracks. At the same time, Charlie and Stephanie are talking to Jenny's father, who is a doctor. When they tell him about the recent drowning, he disrupts the family's peace by explaining that clinical death doesn't work that way. If Charlie managed to save her with CPR, her heart never actually stopped, and she had never truly been dead. Stephanie begins to see the signs of death again as he says this, and the derailing train is ejected right in that direction, causing the siblings to run. When Stephanie trips, the train stops just inches away from her, and she barely escapes. But as soon as she gets up, a handful of logs falls from the train and crushes both siblings at the same time.